Welcome back to Weird Hill to Die On, the podcast where we overanalyze everything, poke at sacred cows, and try to follow Jesus without setting up camp on every petty theological battlefield. I'm Mary Jo Sharp, and today we're spilling the tea on our show title. Why this name? What hill are we even talking about? And is it one worth dying on? Today, we're zooming in on the hill Jesus died on, the ones that we've chosen for better or worse, and how our own stories got tangled up in this whole beautifully weird idea. Now, this isn't your plug and play theology kit. We're here for nuance, discomfort, and the occasional mic drop that makes you question your group chat loyalties. So if you're ready to explore faith with both curiosity and caffeine, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button, share it with your friend who has a spreadsheet of theological beefs, and let's get into it. I'm not rolling solo today. I've got Phoenix Hayes, who somehow balances holy sarcasm and deep introspection. And Adam Coleman, who could probably teach a seminary class mid-podcast and still make you feel seen. Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey.
It's going well. It's going great.
That's nice. That's a lot to live up to.
It is.
Right.
It is.
The pressure is on.
I expect nothing less.
Right. Got it.
Especially holy sarcasm, whatever that one is.
We need a heavy dose of that. Right. Then I'll teach my class.
Yeah. That's right. In the middle of the podcast.
Yeah.
That's right.
We're talking about like our show. It's called Weird Hill to Die On. So what's a weird hill to die on, guys? What is that phrase? What does it mean?
What's a weird hill to die on? Yeah, it's funny. When I told my mother that was the title of our episode, I had to explain it to her too. So it comes from a military term, right? Where it's a tactical. Well, you explain it better, MJ, because you. I can explain the colloquialism, but okay. You give us the actual origin.
Oh, it's just, you're right. It's a military phrase. It was like a hill in a battle that was really important. And so that was the hill that you had to take for that battle. And so it's a hill to die on. Like, it's so important. It's a hill to die on. Yeah. But we've kind of changed that into an expression. So we've got choosing to defend or a very specific or unpopular belief with unusual intensity, especially when others think it's not worth the fight. So now it's kind of morphed into this, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it is.
The internet is definitely the place to go to procure more and more weird hills that people are dying on, given it's a place of just noise and opinion, and it's so easy to cancel and delete and block, and it's just honestly brought out the worst in us in some ways. Yeah, and it's brought out a lot of weird hills that I didn't even know were hills that people wanted to sacrifice themselves on.
Well, I think the weird part, it's like when I was chatting with my wife first about our show, I think she got stuck on the weird part. She's like, "Oh yeah, you're part of something weird. That sounds about right." It's just, whatever the rest means is whatever. Yeah, weird. Okay, yeah, it tracks. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, but I think just I think of the word unique. Sometimes a weird hill, it may not necessarily be a bad thing, but just kind of unique. That's maybe. I want to be, maybe it sounds arrogant to think, nobody's ever thought it before, but something that's just unique to the person that they really have a strong conviction about.
Yeah. Actually, that's really great. You just made a segue into our next section.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that.
It's just beautiful because I think the uniqueness of Jesus's hill that he died on and the uniqueness of that whole situation. And so that's kind of the original weird hill and our weird hill to die on, that the cross was a weird hill. Mm. So talk about what it means to you personally that Jesus chose that hill and how that has shaped your faith.
Yeah, so I would say for me, we live in a society where there's just a plethora of ideas. There's a lot of different worldviews swirling about, and, there's all different worldviews that we encounter. And I think it was the same thing in Jesus' day, But one thing that I think is as odd today as it was then is this notion that somebody would die for others. to take away sins, or just that the good person would die for a bunch of knuckleheads, essentially. When you look at the Roman Empire, they just didn't think that way. That it wasn't that type of self-sacrificial type of a deal. You died for maybe the empire, you maybe died for Caesar, but not for the commoner, who wasn't worth anything, so to speak. Likewise, even in Jewish thought, there was the notion of dying for others, but it was a very specific. It wasn't just anybody. The idea that just anybody would do something like that was still pretty like kind of out of pocket. And I think it's like that today. I mean, I think I love pretty well. I think I love a lot of people, but there's not a lot of people that I would like really jump in front of a bullet for. I don't know. That's probably a terrible thing to say, but but especially like the quote unquote worst of the worst. I mean. It's just not something that generally we do. And so to think that Jesus would die on a hill for the ungodly, for all of us, for those who would reject him, even.
Right. That's key. Yeah.
I think that piece right there makes it an extremely unique hill, both at his time and even today. And so I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to the notion of giving of oneself, that not only does this person in Jesus Christ, but actually find out, hey, he's God too, right? So God has expressed his love through that type of self-sacrifice. That's not something you're going to find in any other religion. It's not something you're going to find in Islam. It's not something you're going to find in Buddhism or whatever other ism you want to name. That's something that's truly unique to Christianity. And if that doesn't at least catch your attention, then I wonder if you truly have comprehended, the meaning of that hill that he died on.
Yeah. And to add to that, the fact that this was not the picture of victory that that comes naturally to mankind generally, but certainly not what the Jews were expecting in the form of a Messiah. That, we have such a image of celebrity and power and wealth and all those things, and Jesus just did not emulate any of it in the human sense. And yet, obviously, he was incredibly powerful. He calmed seas and he raised the dead. There was power there, but it wasn't magnified with publicity and ego and all of those things. And ultimately, he conquers by surrendering, right, to the point of death. And it's so opposite to everything we feel instinctively and so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. You two are both hitting on that sense of this was odd to the people in that, even in that time frame, let alone to us. And you see that with, I think in Luke 7 with John the Baptist, his question to Jesus when he's been imprisoned by Herod, and he's like, wait a minute, Jesus is out there, doing all this work, but it's maybe not the work that John thought the Messiah would be doing, because the Messiah was supposed to come in power, right? He's sort of the liberator of the people of Israel. And it was, it was weird. So the way he was going about his ministry, healing people and standing up for the marginalized and those kinds of things, that John says, hey, are you the one who's to come, or should we look for another? Right? Yeah, so even the prophesied messenger, the Messiah, thinks that this is maybe not a match for what he thought a Messiah would be. And that's, you guys are touching on that. You're hitting, all around that. Adam, you talked about something that I've dealt with Islam, in that Muslims think it's weird that Christians believe that God, the all-powerful God, would lower himself into human form, let alone dying on a cross. That's just inconceivable. That's unthinkable. And so I think they well represent the weirdness of the Christian faith on this matter, you guys have talked about.
Well, if I could just add to that, MJ, because I think this just amplifies all the more the potency of the gospel and the historicity of the resurrection when you think about it. Because as you talked about, Phoenix, like the disciples, the Jews of the first century, they would not have been looking for a Messiah who's going to die on that hill. They're going to be looking for a conquering Messiah, right? But even at the same time, when I think about that conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate as he's standing, before him on trial and essentially waiting to be sentenced. I mean, if Jesus had said, yes, I'm a king, in response to Pontius Pilate's question, if Jesus had responded like, yes, I am a king, and my legions of soldiers are going to storm this castle and take over, Pontius Pilate would have been like, all right, okay, that sounds about right. Yeah, that's the kind of that's what I would expect from a king, right? That's what I would expect the king to say. As a Roman, as a representative of the Roman government, they were all about conquest. That would make sense to them. But so Jesus' response is totally counterintuitive. He doesn't sound like a king. And I think that, for so many of us, like, if you're not looking at just the love of Christ and what he truly did commend to mankind, then you just don't see the true nature of the king. He's not a conquering king in the carnal sense. He's a king who conquers with love.
Right.
And that just, strikes against, so many of our I would say probably, broken intuitions,
Yes.
that are embedded in us due to sin.
Yeah.
So could I ask, Adam, are you kind of dancing around what really first drew you to Jesus?
I am. I really am. So for me, I grew up in church. I was basically born in a church pew, pretty much. Like, there's never been a time where I wasn't in church.
Conceived and delivered.
Right
right there.
Boom, right there. But yeah, it's just I've always been in church, and so it's just always been a part of my life. But I think when I became an adult, when a young adult, going off to college and really being around people, without mom and dad looking over my shoulder, investigating other worldviews, to me, is just the love of Christ seem all the more potent to me. Especially for somebody like myself, is I was a nerd, coming out of high school, going into college, it's just like as common as Christianity was for me, coming up. In some ways, rejection was very common for me as well. Like I was used to being the outsider. I was used to being, the kid who got made fun of for being overweight and uncool and band nerdy and all that kind of stuff. Like that was a part of my life. But in Christ, I found that rejection that I experienced, God is not like that. And not only is God not like that, that amongst believers, amongst those who really claim to know him, I can find a community of people who are like Christ, who won't reject me. And so it's like, it became this thing of, what kind of God is this who can see me for who I am and not push me away? That's just entirely other than what I've experienced, elsewhere. And so, that drew me to Christ. It's just the otherness of God's love, that it's entirely different than what I encountered elsewhere.
Yeah. What about you, Phoenix? What really first drew you to Christ, and was it something kind of weird by the world's standards, like what Adam's talking about?
Yeah, I'm very similar to Adam in that there was no being drawn to Christ. Christ was just there, right? Right from the get-go. I was at church. I was dedicated as a baby and there every Sunday, all the way growing up. What caused me to stay was I recognize that I'm a bit rebellious by nature. I mean, we all are. I'm just a bit more obvious about it. I think I've noticed other people are equally rebellious, but they'll just lie. Like they'll just say one thing and do the opposite. Whereas I'm a bit more like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So naturally, as a teenager, I'm being presented with a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions on how God expects the Christian to live out their life. And naturally, I'm going to push back and say, but why? But why? Like, you got to give me something beyond because it says so in a book. And the answers, I mean, all credit to my mom, who was not a theologian or an apologist. She and the other, leaders around me and the Bible itself were able to give me enough information where I could just stop and say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So not only was obviously I really captured by the love of Christ, but all the things that would typically make a young person want to pull away and go through that rebellion phase, I never went through to a severe degree because I thought, this just makes sense. I don't need to test the rules and then decide, oh, you were right in the end. Christ makes the chaos and the evil around us and the beauty around us, like all of it, he makes it make sense. And that has been my rock all the way through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really nice to hear those backgrounds of like being in the church and still like growing up in the church and still being there.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that. I didn't grow up in the church, and I was very skeptical of Christianity. So Christianity was weird to me before I became a Christian. So I always saw as like, oh, yeah, people in the church, they need that. I don't need that. And I'm not sure what they're doing with it. And then everything that you guys have described is what drew me to Jesus. The beauty I saw, the basis for good and evil, the making sense. I love how you said that, Phoenix. Like when I encountered the scripture for the first time, that's what started making sense to me of the universe in which I lived. And so I really appreciate that you said that, because I think a lot of people, at least in my experience, they've said like, well, this was really an emotional decision on your part. And, and I was like, well, actually, I'm kind of analytic in the way that I come to faith and the way that I think through things. In fact, I didn't have a real emotional experience at that point. I had an experience of, wow, this really makes sense, like you're saying. So that was, I love hearing that. And it does probably sound odd to some people. It is kind of weird that, one of the reasons we believe is it just really makes sense to us. So let me move this a little bit. So in your own life, what's a hill that you've realized is not worth dying on? And it could be whatever. You can make it about, Christianity. You can make it about something else. What's a hill that you have discovered is not worth dying on? Oh, let me throw it to Adam. Unless you want me to throw it to Phoenix first.
Yeah, throw it to Phoenix. I'm going to put her on the hot seat.
Let's go, Phoenix.
All right.
What is it?
This is a fairly easy one because it's now one that ticks me off when I see it in other people. Now that I have given up the hill, I'm like, why are you still sitting on that hill? The young earth creationism view. So most people growing up in the church will never hear an alternative account for the timeline of Earth, and you are cautioned against considering anything else because it would somehow limit the authority of the Bible. And that's just not true. And it's only one analysis of it. And frankly, it doesn't line up with what we actually see in observational science. So all that to say, even though I wasn't going around berating people, nothing like that, but whenever I would hear in a documentary or a show reference to, thousands of years, it would bug me a bit. I'd be like, 6,000 years, because that's
you
the
were
only...
staunch believer.
Because I had been given absolutely no other possible explanation. It was 6,000 years or naturalism. Those were the two.
Okay.
There was no possibility for God to work on a longer timeline by any method. And so now it really bothers me to hear of the number of young believers who have a similar experience to me and then go into the sciences and don't know how to reconcile that gap because no one gave them alternative views and explanations that remained within orthodoxy. And I think that's such a disservice to our young people. So that's the hill that I was on, but really because I didn't know there were other hills that existed. So now when I hear people from that camp who are very militant about it, which I wasn't militant, like I said, I just didn't have any other options. But these people do know about the other options and are still militant. That really bothers me because it's not fair. It's an unnecessary division to put within the church.
Ooh, yeah. I've experienced that one up close where it caused division, and it caused a pastor to berate somebody who was visiting our church and a person who was a seeker. And it really turned that person off from Christianity and the church. So I hear you. I hear what you're saying about that one. Adam, do you get a hill that you no longer will die on?
Yeah. So I almost wanted to comment on that last one. It's just so wild to me, because I can't imagine, whether or not you're a young earth or old earth creationist. I mean, it's certainly not a salvific issue, so it's just really wild to me to berate a visitor to the extent that, I mean, who knows what would ever happen after that, but that they wouldn't be comfortable in the church because of that issue right there. That is weird. That's like gospel weird, in the sense that it's just out of step with, I think, the New Testament is commending to us as those essential truths of Christianity.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's wild to me. I guess so for me, I've chilled out. I'm a pretty chill guy, but
yes, you are.
I do enjoy a good argument. It's almost kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of a thing. I enjoy arguments. I really do. I can argue with somebody all day long. My blood pressure won't raise not one bit. I enjoy it. And so like when I first got into apologetics, I was very, I think I could probably say super like anti-Calvinist, like very anti, Calvinist or Reformed, whatever term you want to use. Not the people, but I was very, very much so against like that theology, to the extent. And fortunately, a lot of my earlier videos, I don't think that they're still on the internet, but like before I started debating,
we'll find them.
Like atheists.
We'll find them.
I know it's out there somewhere on the interwebs. But before I started debating atheists, I had a couple videos where I was going back and forth with Calvinists, about their theology. But since then, I'm still not, definitely not Reformed. That's not what I subscribe to. But I've encountered enough like well-intentioned, intellectually sound, biblically sound, generally speaking, believers who love Jesus to the nth degree and are nevertheless Reformed. I would say might be even a majority of my friends might be Reformed. So I've chilled out a lot. It's no longer a hill that I'm willing to die on. I think that people can be genuinely seeking after Christ and fall on different sides of that particular theological, divide or debate or whatever, and but again, still love Jesus.
Yeah, that is I don't think I've ever gone that far with like maybe like really saying something like I couldn't fellowship with a person or anything like that. But still, I had a kind of a stink eye towards Calvinism, so I understand that. I mean, not just Calvinism, but like a 5-point, tulip or something.
Yeah, let's be clear. There's a certain breed of Calvinism that's quite repugnant.
Hyper Calvinist.
Right.
And now I'm more like, well, I'm like you. I'm more like, I can see that. I can see where you're coming from. So, and it doesn't need to be a hill to die on. So, thanks guys for sharing this. I'll give you one of mine, which is I used to be pretty dismissive of the subjectivity of a person's experience of faith while doing my apologetics. So
we're kind of trained to do that initially, aren't we?
You hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Like your truth doesn't care about your feelings kind of thing. And that's, there is an element when you're talking about external objective reality where, I mean, if you get cancer, it's not concerned with your feelings about it. It's just there. So, but now I'm reconsidering that it's very difficult for a person to encounter objective truth if I'm actively dismissing their lived experience as unimportant, or like making it of such lesser importance that I sort of bulldoze right through it just so I can, argue my point. And so I see that like I've learned that's not a hill Jesus is dying on. Even when he's speaking more aggressively and giving harder truths, he's not just bulldozing through people. And so I'm finding it to be a method that is ineffective in communicating the gospel. And it's funny because it goes back to people don't care what you know until they know that you care. That old saying. Yeah. And it's that's not a hill that I think is worth dying on anymore. I think we need to balance our understanding of objectivity and subjectivity and how it plays out in a person's life and how it plays out in apologetics in particular. So.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Okay, so unless you want to comment on that.
Well, I think the thing I just keep thinking of is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's just the summary of doing apologetics well and evangelism well is, how they feel subjectively and their lived experience will not change the objective truth that you're delivering to them, but it will absolutely affect how they receive it. And the whole point is not to deliver information, it's to deliver hope and a solution and a life saver to them. So if that means being more gentle in your tone, or in this case, being more gentle in giving room for their lived experience, that's just a sign of patience, maturity, and love to work with a real human that cannot easily flick a switch and separate knowledge from lived experience. Even though it will not change the truth, the point isn't to deliver facts. You're not a calculator. The point is to persuade lovingly.
Well, I was going to say, like, if you look at, I mean, from an epistemological standpoint, we talked about epistemology. I feel like almost every other episode throughout the season, but it's knowledge. There's at least three types of knowledge: procedural knowledge. You have propositional knowledge, kind of like your book knowledge, if you will, or knowledge of facts, and then you have knowledge of acquaintance. Well, like two out of those three are very experiential. Procedural knowledge, that know-how, that riding a bike type of experience, like you gain something like that through experience. Knowledge of acquaintance, it's through experience. So at least 2/3 of the types of knowledge that I would say all philosophers would acknowledge are experiential. And I think that if you look at the scriptures, God is constantly communicating on all of those three. Like he's giving you propositional knowledge, but then there's the walking with Christ element. There's things that you come to understand by walking with Christ. There's a procedural knowledge element. And then there's knowledge of acquaintance. There's this direct experience with God, Interesting enough, like my grandma, who's passed on now, like she used to always tell this story about how she came to Christ. She would tell this story about how she was hard-hearted and never wanted to go to church and just was, against, just wasn't embracing Christianity whatsoever. And she was out in the woods one day, just sitting there by herself, and she felt just a voice. She had an encounter where she felt a voice. The voice said to her, "Annie, do you trust me? Annie, do you trust me?" And she felt like she knew it was God. God, had encountered her in that way, and it just happened to be on a Sunday morning. So she literally ran down to the church house, and she recalls hearing that some of the church folks who saw her coming from afar saying, "She's got it, Annie's finally got it."
Aww.
And then she gives her life to Christ, that day.
Yeah.
And so, like, my grandma could not have given the Kalam cosmological argument or the argument from mathematics and physics or whatever. Like she could not have broken that down to you. But did she have a real and vibrant relationship with Christ that began with something experiential? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it continued on for the rest of her life. So we just don't know how God is going to reach somebody. And we have to be careful not to limit, what God is doing to just the propositional, just the, syllogisms and such. God has a wider net than that, and we have to make space for it,
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that take on it. Don't limit in your mind. Obviously, we can't limit God in that way, but don't limit in your mind, because that limits how you're growing and you're changing and you're communicating the gospel. So that's really good. That's a great example. So I'm gonna lighten it up a bit. All right. Because this is the season finale. So
right.
We've talked a little bit about the weird hill of Jesus and what it meant to us. We've talked a little bit about some of the weird hills that we've given up, but also that Christians die on. And then, so like, what's one weird hill? We're just going to take it lighthearted. What's one weird hill that you jokingly love, but you would never actually die on? Phoenix, why don't you? It sounds like you might have one.
No, I was actually hoping Adam would answer because
I do have one, so I can jump in.
Yeah,
let's go. Let's go.
I would jokingly down this hill, but probably not really. Well, yeah, not really. I'm taking Star Wars over Star Trek all day. All day long. Like I enjoy Star Trek. I respect it as a franchise, but I just think that Star Wars, just takes the day for me. And so I'm definitely not willing to die on it. Like if somebody puts a gun in my head, it's like, watch this Star Trek episode. I'm not going to be like, no, take me to my grave immediately. I'm sticking with Star Wars. But, I would take Star Wars over Star Trek all day.
Oh, Adam, have you seen it's a reel on Instagram, it might be on TikTok, of the Star Wars versus Star Trek where Vader shows up to the Enterprise, and he's on the big screen, like the Enterprise's, viewer screen, and they put him up there, and Picard's there, like, oh no, this guy again, and Vader says, "Nerds." Anyway, you just made me think of that. Like, he's bantering, he's just totally calling them nerds and making fun of them, and I was like, yeah, that's something Anakin Skywalker.
That's about right. Yeah, that sounds about right. That's
anyway,
all right. Okay, I'm going to cheat again and throw it to MJ. Can you give yours while I continue to hold that thought?
Perfect, because mine was also Star Wars, but it was not versus. I like both Star Trek and Star Wars, but my hill to die on is my Star Wars fandom. Like, if you talk to me for any length of time, I'll probably hit on Star Wars at some point because I watch everything and I go deep. I don't read all of the books, but I do have some graphic novels, I'll just say. So, like, I am, I've done some Comic-Con dressed up as a Jedi. It's pretty deep in my family.
All right.
And like
the nerddom runs deep.
The only seriously heated argument in my life with my daughter was over Star Wars.
Wow. That's amazing.
It was a point in Star Wars about whether or not Anakin Skywalker would have killed Padme on the platform at Mustafar if Obi-Wan hadn't come off Padme's ship at that point. Like, so, like,
and where did you land on that?
I think he would have. I think it would have been like a crime of passion because he was in the moment, and the dark side of the Force really causes you to do stuff you don't want to do. And she thinks there's no way because the whole reason he went to the dark side was to save her. So, and then he said, like, ultimately when there's that whole scene where Palpatine tells him that eventually he killed her, is what he says. Anakin, she was like, look at Anakin's response. No, Vader. And I'm like, well, I still think he would have. But this caused a major argument on Christmas Day when she was a teenager. Like,
on Christmas, wow.
Yeah, we were going at each other pretty hardcore. There's always love in the end, but seriously, of all the things that parents and children fight about, that is it, you guys.
Was she grounded? Did you
That's
ground
bad. That's really not bad.
Yeah. No, not grounded. We just made it our life mission to ask people where they land on that argument.
Got it.
Yeah.
My weird hill, well, these are so, I wish I should have come more prepared, knowing that this was the topic of this episode. But okay.
Preparation.
Preparation. When I was doing my undergrad, my major was film. I love film. I love the production. I love the storytelling. I love everything about it. And as part of the course, I had to watch so many top-ranking films from film history. I'm talking 30s, 40s, 50s plus. And I'd be sitting there and the professor's like, this is fabulous. This is amazing. Look what he does here. And I'm like, I don't get it. This sucks. I mean, a classic one is, what's the one about Rosemary, the black and white one? Help me.
Is Rosemary the sled?
Yeah. I'm blanking on the name.
Oh, you're talking about Rosebud?
Rosebud.
Yeah.
Is the sled.
Yeah, but what's the name of the movie?
Is that Citizen Kane?
Citizen Kane.
Yeah. It's been so long.
Awful. And then Stanley Kubrick's year, the one where Hal kills everybody.
2001 Space Odyssey.
Yes. I'm like, this is torture. This is the most torturous thing to watch. And this is cinema, and I'm like, I hate it. It's pretentious. It's BS. It's anyway. So, all of my cinephile friends, I would be kicked from the club, and I'm like, this sucks.
You're losing your card.
Yeah.
You're losing your card over Citizen Kane. For sure is going to make you lose your cinephile card.
Yeah, I was just like, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm like talking objectively speaking. This is bad storytelling. So
I feel like I agree with you, but I don't know if I would say it out loud. I think I agree, and I can see how you would get kicked, how you would lose your cinephile card.
Yeah, you do. You would for sure. I mean, I'm like, whatever. I think we're all pretending, to be honest.
From what I remember, I think I actually like Citizen Kane, but maybe now I'll go back.
Someone would have to pay me $1,000 to go back and rewatch it and see if I have a different opinion. But a part of my soul died during that 3-hour, however long it was. So, I can't go back.
So maybe we'll just rewatch it, and then that'll just be the whole second season of Weird Hill Down. Just picking apart Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane. This is the real deep dive for all you real committed fans out there.
Right.
You can stick with us on the Citizen Kane episodes.
I had to watch a 3-minute movie called Blue, which was better, and it was just a blue screen.
Was that real?
Oh, yeah. See, Adam and I were talking before the show about art that goes this direction. Like I was telling you, the sort of postmodern music with the I didn't say it before, but John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where there is no music, it's just the sounds of the theater in which you're performing or the venue, and we all hate it. Like all musicians hate it. So I say that, sorry, all musicians, if you're not with me on that, but I haven't met one that likes it. So
you're not a musician if you love it.
But that's the Blue. That's what that reminds me of. Is just like it's a screen. You're not doing anything but showing a screen.
Mm. It felt very much like the emperor wearing his no clothes, and everyone's sitting there like, this is just a blue screen, right? Yeah. But it's amazing. I was like, I can't do this. Okay.
We're getting ourselves kicked out of the art world. That's what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have no taste at all.
Yeah, that's right. Totally that's right. Totally chompy in our taste. Okay, so let me rein us back in. Rein it back in a little bit. So I'm going to go back to these hills that people die on. So we've talked a little bit about what we've released as far as our Christian hills that we die on or not. And what do you think? Well, let's zoom in on how we decide which hills matter. So what do you think is the difference between dying on a hill for truth versus dying on a hill for ego?
Man.
Do you have some thoughts on that, Adam?
I do, because in some ways the question itself is convicting, because I feel like I've probably done both at different times. There are times when I know for a fact I've been wrong about something. I'm just gonna make it like super real, like with my wife, for example. Sometimes it's like I know I'm dead wrong, but it's just but maybe I can figure out a way to
gaslight this woman.
And,
I love that Adam's wife made it on the show again. Yes,
for sure. And I don't think this is I'm not saying I've ever actually done this, but I don't think she would mind me saying that she does have ADHD, so sometimes she forgets things. So I have been tempted to play on that in an argument. Yeah, you just forgot that I said so. I haven't actually done it, but I've kept it in my back pocket.
Don't do that, Adam.
Yeah,
don't do that.
The temptation.
That's a good one to keep in the back pocket.
I'm just saying, it's my trump card. If I ever get myself in some real trouble, I'm like, you just forgot. You weren't paying attention when I said such and such. It's terrible.
That's great.
But no, I mean, there are definitely some times where, her and I have been, talking about something, whatever it may be, and I know I'm wrong. And on the inside, I feel like just that conviction is like, dude, you're wrong. Just give it up. But I just can't. I just have to keep going. So, so I've been there. As far as dying for truth, though, it's. I think it's valiant to do. I mean, very rarely are we really called upon to actually die for something true. But if something is true, particularly like something of consequence, you know what I mean, like the gospel, that's obviously something worth dying for. I'm not even sure that all truths are. I don't think that all truths are worth dying for, but that one, absolutely.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't. The easiest example would be the same marital conflict, where you've got a bit of ego to defend, but in exchanges outside of that, at the end of the day, if a person's going to disagree with me over a point of truth, I'm not going to die on it. I'm not going to agree with you, and we can just walk our separate ways. Like, okay, but if it's a question of no, you need to admit that Jesus is false or Christian, something like that. Well, then no, I'm 100% not going to. I'm not going to budge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas most other things, I'm not going to change my position, but I'm not going to continue to stand here and fight with you. If it's a free country, you can disagree.
I will say this though, I do think that, and I don't. Well, I'm not in this position, but if my livelihood depended upon something that I've been teaching for years or something like that, if I had a particular, if I was, and I'm not saying this is the case, I'm just thinking about William Lane Craig, for example, his but much of his platform has revolved around the Kalam cosmological argument. It's if I had an argument like that I came to find out was really trash or something like that, I could imagine how that'd be really difficult, because it's so central to my work and I've been talking about it for years and I've been doing speaking engagements and making money, I could see how when I contributed to Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel, I was very careful about the arguments that I laid out in that book, because I can't imagine putting something in print and then later on be like, man, that was garbage. That would be tough. that would be tough not to defend.
Yeah.
I think a lot of authors deal with it. They're like, I no longer agree with what I wrote.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do I do?
Yeah. Actually, that's, I think it's Immanuel Kant. Somebody can correct me on that later, but who went back in I believe his 60s and refuted his earlier self, his earlier works. So he actually took the time to go back and refute himself. And so, he's not dying on his heels for ego at that point, but that would be tough. That takes a certain kind of person. So I appreciate that you brought that up.
Yeah.
So you guys, so we're at the end of season 1. This is the 10th episode, and we kind of our show kind of centers around that question about dying on hills for ego versus truth and all of the nuances that go along with that. So I'm kind of asking a reflective question about the show. What has been your favorite part of what we've been doing, or maybe what have you learned along the way so far? Just, give our viewers a little insight into your thoughts on the show.
Yeah.
Oh, my thoughts have been, it's just been so fun to talk about really, really deep points and points that are often controversial. And we'll launch into it not knowing ahead of time what the other co-hosts actually think on it.
Yeah.
And we're able to wrestle with it a little. I mean, there's not much wrestling because overall I think we agree on a lot, on the majority of what we've talked about, but it's just been so fun in the discussion and in the wrestling. So we can have these really rich discussions about things we may not be completely on the same page about, but we're all learning from each other's perspectives without feeling like we have to compromise on our hills. And we're able to laugh and enjoy the humanity of it all as we fumble through. So I've loved all of that.
Yeah, me too.
I was going to say something similar. Just it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun hanging out with you guys for sure. And I think for me, it's just kind of been a reminder for me. Just it's okay to take the scenic route. When discussing something, I think so much of, especially when you're a content creator or you're working on certain things, you just kind of want to get to the argument or the point you're trying to make and articulate it. And then sometimes we miss the step of just how fun it can be to take the scenic route to just kind of chew on something for a while. And I feel like, looking over our season, just there's so many times where we end up on these rabbit trails and we had no idea we were going to go there. It's super off the rails, but they're fun. They're fun, scenic routes. And so I think that I would imagine, I hope that the listeners enjoy that as well.
Yeah. And I was going to say, we rarely land the plane on a lot of our discussion points. So, but that's cool because they can go to our respective channels where when you're doing solo content, there is no discussion. You just got to land the plane. So follow each of us.
I love that, you guys. Yeah, I've enjoyed having the different perspectives. Like you're saying, when you're solo doing something, you're just making an argument, you're giving your ideas on it. But when you hear your ideas, being engaged in a different way from somebody else, it's just great. It broadens your perspective. And though we do agree a lot theologically, we do have very different backgrounds. And so it's fun to hear your perspective on the same issue, but from your experience and from how you've engaged it and from your vantage point in the world. So I love that. Yeah, me too. I love hearing that. I love the rabbit trails, you guys. They're the best.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I love that frequently we'll blurt out a comment kind of on the fly, and then a co-host will say, "Wait, what did you mean by that?" And it gives you a second to. I mean, our episode, for those who watched it, episode 9, I just randomly said, yeah, presuppositional is a terrible way to do apologetics. and then MJ brought up 2 or 3 specific examples of things I would absolutely do and endorse. So I'm like, okay, I didn't think through that statement as I blurted it out. Of course, there's a place for presup. So just having someone else be like, wait a second, and you're like, oh, no, I didn't quite mean that, actually.
Yeah. I think that's the courage to be that we have the courage to be wrong on some things. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that you were wrong, but just saying that that's part of the ethos of the show is that we don't have to be right on everything. So I think there's a pressure to do that when you're solo flying, but we're having that like space to work through things, to hear different perspectives, and to try to grow as Christians. And so figuring out that not every hill is worth dying on, which is a part of our show. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the fun that we've been having on the show. I'm really looking forward to season 2 and to seeing what comes of that. What are you guys looking forward to in that next season?
Yeah, so I'm going to say I feel like season 1 has been an adventure, and I'm excited about just having sat down with you guys and got to know you a little bit. Kind of where the adventure takes us next. I can imagine that there's been tons of surprises, this first go around, and who knows what's around the bend. But it's just I think just the mystery of it. I think that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to discovering interesting conversations with you guys, and I think that because we're so unscripted, like because we don't know what each other believes, it just leaves it open for ourselves and for the audience to just kind of be on this path of discovery from episode to episode. And we don't know where it's going to end up. Like Phoenix said, we don't know where we're going to land the plane. We know we got a plane. We're building it as we fly, and we have no idea how it's going to land. But it all just makes for this exciting dynamic that I think is going to be really awesome.
Yeah, that's good. I can't wait for us to be in the same room together to record, because we have so much fun across the miles where we're doing this remotely. But we have some plans in the works to get us all in the same room so we can really just bounce off each other and enjoy that energy together. And I cannot wait to do that. And I'm excited to potentially down the line bring in some guests that we absolutely disagree with. even atheists, and even all kinds of different views, so that we can just demonstrate to people how to have these conversations with people who hold beliefs that not only you disagree with, but might outright offend you. I want us to be able to do that and demonstrate that to people. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's kind of in our plans. That's in the works for future seasons, right? So yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate that. Definitely echo your thoughts on that. And that is going to be a wrap on season 1 of Weird Hill to Die On. Nice. So huge thanks to my brilliant, snarky, soul-searching co-hosts, Phoenix Hayes and Adam Coleman, for making this season equal parts wisdom, wit, and barely contained chaos. Y'all are the Weird Hill Dream Team. If today's episode blessed you, stressed you, or made you question your life choices, hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to suffer with you. If you loved hanging out with us this season, here's the truth. We'd love to keep the weird going, but we can't do it without you. Want to keep this show running? Toss a coin to your podcasters at maryjosharp.com/donate and help us build something beautiful, hilarious, and deeply needed in the Christian conversation. Want more theological hot takes, spicy side quests, and heresy-adjacent humor? Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, watch us on YouTube, and listen on Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you make questionable podcast choices. We'll be back with more Weird Hills, Big Questions, and possibly worse jokes in season 2. Until then, question boldly, love deeply, and for the love of all that is holy, pick your hills wisely.